He looked, well, 80 years old as he sat in the witness chair and haltingly answered the lawmakers' questions. Rupert Murdoch, often overshadowed by his son James, says he runs a big company and couldn't be expected to know the details of illegal conduct at one London tabloid, or precisely how it was covered up. In fact, the chief executive of News Corp went out of his way to downplay his influence.
Sometimes I would ring the editor of News of the World on a Saturday night and say, have you got any news tonight? But it was just to keep in touch. I ring the editor of the Sunday Times nearly every Saturday, not to influence what he has to say at all.
Perhaps the most penetrating question came from a member of Parliament who wanted to know just where did the buck stop.
Mr. Murdoch, do you accept that ultimately you are responsible for this whole fiasco?
No.
You're not responsible. Who is responsible?
The people that I trusted to run it, and then maybe the people they trusted.
The hearing was carried live by all three cable news networks, yes, including Murdoch's Fox News, and made headlines here and around the world.
80-year-old global power broker Rupert Murdoch called this the most humble day of his life, and we watched him called to account in front of the British Parliament for the scandal that outraged the world.
Well, Rupert Murdoch called it the most humbling day of his life, and he said he was sorry, but it wasn't his fault, and he wasn't resigning. Then someone hit him with a cream pie.
And boy, did cable news enjoy replaying that moment with the clown who threw the pie. Joining us now to examine the impact of this fast-moving scandal and talk about this week's developments via a video connection from Cambridge, England, John Burns, London bureau chief of the New York Times. In Boston, Paul Farhi, a media reporter for the Washington Post. And in New York, Vicky Ward, contributing editor for Vanity Fair, who has worked for several Murdoch newspapers. John Burns, Murdoch didn't say anything that particularly damaged him in that testimony, but he sure looked like something of a detached CEO, did he not?
He certainly did. I mean, it's one thing to say that he only called the News of the World editor from time to time and asked him what's doing. It's another thing to say that 5 years into this building scandal, he just remained hands off. I mean, at some point or other, this shrewd, astute, tough guy, you would have thought, would have wanted to look into this more seriously, or to tell his son, who runs the British operations, to look into it more seriously. So the question arises, of course, did he just stay away because he didn't want his fingerprints on any of this?
That is a very good question. And speaking of his son, Paul Farhi, James Murdoch, who did much of the talking at that hearing, said he didn't know about the details of the evidence when he approved a $1.4 million settlement to one of the hacking victims who had sued. And then two former executives of News Corp came out and said, no, that's not right. We told him. So is this a building credibility crisis for the Murdochs right now?
Yes, it certainly is. It's difficult to claim that you're paying out these large sums of money to people and then discover that there's a whole mess of these out there. And that's what's going on with James Murdoch. You know, as a CEO of this division, it's his job to know, and he's had several years, as John points out, to know. The fact that he didn't suggests that he's either dumb or he's incompetent.
Vicky Ward, you know the Murdoch family. What toll is this taking on Rupert?
Well, I think it's taking an enormous toll. It would be very surprising if it wasn't Howie, but I think I'd like to address a few things that have come out that unless you actually have worked for the Murdochs, you don't know. So to take John's point about how could he not know what was going on at the News of the World, quite frankly, Rupert Murdoch, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when those English papers were his babies, he'd broken the print unions to basically create that empire. Then he did call those newspaper editors all the time. But News Corp has evolved. It's become a much larger, much global company. Those newspapers create a fraction of its wealth. And now I think it's quite legitimate when he says he delegated, and yes, there were problems with that. We now know major problems, but he did delegate, and I think that that is a credible statement.
Okay, you know, the question remains, as the member of Parliament asked, if Rupert is not responsible, and if James didn't know, then who is responsible? Well, let me move on because I want to play some tape for John Burns about some comments you may have heard about this from Fox's Bill O'Reilly, who says, of course, anybody who broke the law at the News of the World should be punished. But he also had this to say involving your newspaper.
But here in the United States, there isn't any intrusion of this story thus far on News Corp properties, none. Yet you have the New York Times absolutely running wild with the story. Front page, front page, front page, column, 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 vicious stuff, vicious stuff. And it's all ideological, is it not?
So running wild, vicious stuff, ideological?
You're asking me? Howard, nonsense, rubbish. Not at all. Who could deny that a scandal in one of the world's largest, if not the largest media organization with influence over tens of millions of people, a scandal of this kind is not news? Secondly, as for vicious and the rest of it, I just ask your viewers to go to our website and read what we've actually written about this, and I think he'll find that it's forensic, it's very careful. If there's any stepping over that mark, you can be sure that our editors will push us back and remind us not to do it. And as a matter of fact, I would say the opposite is true. I think because the New York Times has to worry about competition from Murdoch properties like the Wall Street Journal, we have been especially careful to be forensic and even-handed about this. So Bill Riley attacking us like that is just nonsense. I'm sorry.
The coverage has certainly been...
Harry,
Go ahead, Vicky.
okay, just, John, with all due respect, in your own paper today, there's a headline that reads, CNN host and ex-tabloid editor is reluctantly dragged into the phone scandal. Well, talking about Piers Morgan, he wasn't reluctantly dragged into the phone scandal. He came out on his own volition on Monday night, and then certain assertions were made by Louise Mensch, a British member of Parliament, about what was written in his diaries, that he then defended himself and said were categorically untrue, and that all you had to do in order for him to be validated was actually read his book. And even the British have come out and said she got it wrong.
Let's get a response
as the New York Times has today.
I think there's an edge of paranoia of what you're saying. You apparently don't want to talk about the substance of the article, which gives full voice, very extensive voice, and I know this firsthand because I was involved in preparing an email exchange. It could only be email because that's what Piers Morgan insisted on last night. The questions that we put to him, he answered them fully, and we ran a very long story, 2 pages on the website, giving his answers in full. As for the reluctantly dragged in, I'm sure everybody who has been associated with this in any way, whose name has been brought up in any way, would be reluctant to be drawn into it. And I think Piers Morgan would be the first to say, and it certainly was, it was strongly implicit in everything that he said to us on the telephone and by email last night, that he was very reluctant.
All right,
Let me
not so reluctant. Vicky, hold on. Let me not so reluctantly jump in because we invited Piers Morgan to appear on this program because of the questions have been raised. He declined. I want to play some tape, and we'll continue on the other side of British Member of Parliament Louise Mensch talking about this on CNN and Morgan's very aggressive response.
I said what I said in the committee, Wolf, and I'm afraid right now I'm going to say that I can't comment about it outside of the committee room.
And I call on you, Miss Mensch, now to repeat it, show some balls, repeat what you said about me, and then maybe go and buy a copy of my book, The Insider.
She made some very specific claims, and in fact, later on, she repeated them, even down to me apparently giving tutorials in phone hacking, how I'd hacked people myself, how my staff had broken stories of phone hacking, and she has absolutely no evidence for any of this, and she based it on what she claimed I had published in my own volume of diaries.
Paul Farry, let me let you be the arbiter here. There's also a former Telegraph reporter telling London's Independent that he believes that Piers Morgan probably knew about hacking when he was the editor of the Telegraph, for those who are not familiar with his background. But, of course, Morgan puts out that the guy has already gone to jail. How much of a problem is this for Piers Morgan?
Well, I don't think it's a problem because Louise Mensch is wrong. It is not in his book. He does not mention hacking. The whole basis of her story is incorrect. The reporter who accused Piers Morgan of hacking is himself accused of insider trading and was involved in a scandal over there in London.
He went to jail.
Just one thing about Bill.
Go ahead.
He went to jail for it, convicted. Just one thing about Bill O'Reilly and Fox has some explaining to do as well. They are invested in this story, or not invested in this story, as the case may be. They have covered this story much less, far less, than CNN has or that MSNBC has. And it may well be as a result of their ownership and their competitive position that they have made that editorial judgment not to cover it as much.
All right, well, Fox has covered it a little more than in the beginning and certainly did carry the hearings, but the Project for Excellence in Journalism actually did a study July, what are the dates? July 6th to July 15th in the evening only. You see CNN with 130 minutes, MSNBC with 125 minutes, Fox News with 24 minutes. Vicki Ward, let me ask you, because the Wall Street Journal, which of course Murdoch also owns, had an editorial this week kind of mocking the moral outrage being directed at one company, News Corp, saying lots of tabloids in Britain have engaged in all kinds of outrageous behavior, and yet you have Rupert Murdoch saying this is the humblest day of his life. So which one are we going to believe, that he and the management are sorry, or that this is being made too much of by the rest of the press?
Yeah, it's a great question, Harry. I think, and I've spoken about this before, you have a real problem. I believe that Rupert is sincerely appalled and sorry that in the case of Millie Dowler, which was really what brought this scandal about when it was revealed, that a teenage girl's phone was tampered with in order to sell newspapers because readers might think she was still alive,
Are the critics going overboard, as the Wall Street Journal editorial suggests? I have only a few seconds here.
Okay. The Wall Street Journal have the right to say that, I think, because there are plenty of other stories in your own country. Watergate, the Pentagon Papers. And in England, the Daily Telegraph 2 years ago, you paid for stolen records to expose MPs' stolen expenses. So there is a certain complicitness in Britain and here that sometimes illegal means are justified to use the ends, not when a girl has been murdered. But where is the line?
Gotta jump in.
Where is the line?
Got to jump in. John Burns, quick final thought on whether the coverage has been a little overheated?
No, I don't think so at all. I can only say again to your viewers who care about this, and I'm sure many do, please go to our website or go to copies of our print editions, today's and the last weeks and months, and make your own judgment. I think you'll see that in the tradition of the New York Times, it's very, very balanced and very careful. And we have said more than once, that Mr. Murdoch deserves great credit in many respects for what he's done for British newspapering. In fact, in the 1980s, by confronting the unions here, he may have saved the Times of London and other titles that he now owns.
All right,
so we have tried at every turn to be even-handed.